Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to a little four-line poem, 361, What I Can Do, I Will. And as we've said a number of times about these short poems, just using one of Emily's own poems at poem 1063, Ashes denote that fire was. Just because these poems are short doesn't mean that there's not something profound happening in them, and I think this is a classic example of that. Now, here we're going to learn a little bit more about what I will reference as Emily's energy conservation model. And in some ways, I think she's borrowing heavily from Marcus Aurelius and her understandings there, and it sounds a whole lot like what we've said about Thoreau from our study of Walden. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hoping that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 360 poems. We just finished with 360, Death Sets and Things Significant. And if you have, then you note that Emily has written a number of poems about poetry and a number of poems about what she can and cannot do. Now, some people will see this poem as resignation. In other words, dude, I've done everything I can do. Please leave me alone. Or, rather, as many will read this poem, hey, I have chosen what I will do and I have done it to the best of my abilities. How you decide to read this poem, I'll leave to you. This is how she says it. What I can do, I will, though it be little as a daffodil. That I cannot must be unknown to possibility. Now, of course, note that Emily will play the game of a little bit of rhyming at the end of each of these lines. The poem comes off as almost like a throwaway. Hey, I did the best I could. But I think there's something far more profound happening here as she says, what I can do, I will. When we meet poem 772, she'll say it, all is the price of all. In other words, I think you can read this as, if I have an opportunity to do it, I'm going to do it. Now, what is she speaking about specifically? Is she talking about gardening? Or is she talking about helping someone? Or is she talking about poetry? And I would say yes, yes, and yes. That is to say, for Emily, she can be speaking about anything. Many have read this as though almost a manifesto regarding her own poetic venture. In other words, what I could do, I did do. Though it be little. I told you guys about her use of this word. In 172 poems, she'll use this word little as a daffodil, taking us back to poem 60. And in 12 poems, she'll reference one of her favorite flowers, the daffodil. That I cannot. In other words, it's just a restatement. The stuff I cannot do must be unknown to possibility. Possibility taking us back to poem 106. Of course, when we get to poem 657, we're going to really enjoy this use of this word possibility. She says it this way, I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roost the gambols of the sky, of visitors, the fairest for occupation, this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. Emily loves the idea of possibility. She will say in poem 696, acres of perhaps, which is a very similar kind of understanding. What exactly is going on here at 2A? I think her argument is that true artists do all that they can and they leave the rest alone. In other words, they don't waste their energy. In other words, for Emily, the best I can do is all I could do. And I'm not going to lament what has to remain an unknown possibility. At 2B, well, again, we pointed out the rhyme. I love the voice in this. It can be read as searching. It can be read as defiant. And I love that about it. How do you guys read it? I'll leave it up to you. At 3A, and I think this is possibly in the back of Emily's mind, I think she's responding to Wordsworth's I wandered lonely as a cloud. We've given a full exegesis of this at LearnStrong.net. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. I think her use of the word daffodils here is possibly, maybe, chosen specifically in reference to Wordsworth. Of course, we can think about our study of Thoreau. We did all of Walden at learnstrong.net. You can run those comments to ground. But you'll remember that Thoreau was always about energy conservation. Yes, that notion that you have to be specific. What's he say? Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. The goal, of course, is to figure out what it is that most matters. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn that does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of a man to elevate his life by a, conscious endeavor. I think Emily is arguing here in this poem, this is my conscious endeavor. And because it's intentional, because it's conscious, this is the best that I could do. I leave all the rest to an unknown possibility. Finally, at 3B, to own a poem like this. How do you play around with the energy conservation model? And to what degree is your study of Emily helping you to find your way to that notion of do the best you can? Thank you.